Trinidad and Tobago has just celebrated the Carnival season, a period in which loud music without any melody is blared from every speaker in the vicinity, the consumption of alcohol is largely encouraged, and people act in a rather animalistic fashion, appealing to the basest desires of man. To its credit, there is a more traditional side to Carnival, where people dress up in wondrous costumes to show off their creativity. But this is tucked into the background, and most of the focus is on having a good time, which involves much of what I just mentioned. In this video, I'm going to explore both aspects of Carnival and compare it to carnivals in other countries. Trinidad's Carnival can be dated back to the late 18th century, when there was an influx of French planters into the island. Christopher Columbus had discovered the island some 200 years prior, in 1498, but there was not any major settlement or occupation until the Spanish king Jose de Galvez issued a cedula of population for Trinidad and Tobago in 1783. This cedula was issued with hopes of transforming Trinidad into a flourishing plantation economy. The law attracted many wealthy French planters from other Caribbean nations, including mulattoes and free blacks. The French planters were accompanied by their slaves, and land was allotted proportionate to the number of slaves. In 1797, Trinidad was captured by the British and was made a crown colony of Great Britain. The French and the English within Trinidad had their fair share of celebration, their own carnival, where they would host balls, fêtes champêtres, parties, and other various forms of entertainment. During these celebrations, they forbade the Africans and the coloureds from participating in the street festivities, and so they decided to create their own, in revolt to their white masters, but also to promote their own culture. They mimicked the balls and parties that were thrown by the French and the English, but injected their culture into it so that the instruments that were played were African instruments. The songs sung would come from the African continent, and the costumes used would come from their own folklore. These early celebrations were seen as boisterous and disruptive to the public order, and so the British sought to restrict certain aspects of this early form of carnival, which led to the Carnival riots in 1881. This created a deep resentment between the locals and the British colonials. Characters like the Dame Lorraine were insulting representations of the French aristocratic woman, where a man would dress as a woman with padded breasts and buttocks to exaggerate the woman's features. The Pierrot Grande is also a satire of the French Pierrot, usually known for his erudition, but the Pierrot Grande is egotistical and wears rags instead of fine clothes. However, these are just two in a long list of characters that enter and leave Carnival throughout the ages. Characters like the Midnight Robber, who are meant to tell wonderful stories, or the Jab Jab, who are rope-fighting devils, are meant to encapsulate some of the more cultural aspects of Carnival. The structure of modern-day Carnival is as follows. The weeks leading up to Carnival are filled with fêtes, and radio stations begin to play soca throughout the airwaves. Now, fêtes are no longer the fêtes champêtres that was celebrated by the French, but a Bacchanalia event, where there's a lot of alcohol consumption and debauchery. In fact, the week leading into Carnival is known as the Bacchanal week, where people are encouraged to party hard and indulge all vices as a form of catharsis. The Sunday before Carnival is known as Juve, where people would wake before the sun rises and fete till the sun rose. This usually involves people being covered in mud, paint, or grease, and the arrival of more traditional costumes, like the Jab Jab, the Dame Lorraine, the Midnight Robbers, and many more. Then on Carnival Monday and Tuesday, you have what is known as Pretty Mass, which is where everyone flocks to the street in their carnival costumes, with trucks equipped with massive speakers to blare soca music and party until it is Ash Wednesday. The reason I am bringing all of this up is that Carnival is by and large a festival filled with lots of degeneracy, and it is largely reactionary of the French and British carnivals of old. This isn't to say that there aren't some wonderful aspects of the festival that shine through. However, it is muddied and soiled by everything else. Seeing it transpire before my eyes, I can't help but speak about it and encourage instead Trinidad should be striving for excellence and beauty, and so the concept of fêtes and Bacchanalia need be revised. The slave revolt in morality begins when the resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. The resentment of those beings who are prevented from a genuinely active reaction and who compensate for that with a merely imaginary vengeance. While all noble morality grows out of a triumphant self-affirmation, slave morality from the start says no to what is outside, other, and non-self. And this no is its creative act. This transformation of the glance which confers value, this necessary projection towards what is outer instead of back onto itself, that is inherent in resentment. In order to arise, slave morality always requires first an opposing world, a world outside itself. Psychologically speaking, it needs external stimuli in order to act at all. Its action is basically reaction. The reason for aspiring for higher culture should become apparent when comparing Trinidadian Carnival to others. Take what fetes have degenerated to versus what they were before. Currently, Carnival appeals to the lowest common denominator, which is why soca music is extremely simplistic in terms of melody and lyrics.
Why we no question mark, we take why with apostrophes. Get gal with more lyrical content than Socrates. She could have shaped like a triangle with a cosine of isosceles. Any other thing different, right, that is blasphemy. I ain't come here for no stand up. I come to party with my hand up. So all soca people, put your 2-1 in the air. Your 2-1 in the air. Your 2-1 in the air. All soca lovers do this. Show me your hand. 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 Show me your hand.
Extremely simple lyrics, with a mathematical error in the line whether cosine or isosceles, as cosine is not a type of triangle. I feel extremely ashamed that a name like Socrates is included in this song. The entire lyric of the song is to further encourage Bacchanalia, and specifically designed to rile a crowd with simple commands such as put your hands up. If we compare this to any classical piece, we find the starkest contrast between beauty and ugliness. Continuing in this fashion, we will become the last man that Nietzsche spoke of. Instead, we need to abandon the ugly aspects of Carnival and promote a more beautiful side. The festival should become closer to how Carnival is treated in Europe, as a celebration in preparation for the Lenten period of fasting, where lots of food is consumed and there's good cheer and song, whilst retaining those cultural aspects that are important to Trinidad. Carnival in Trinidad was born through defiance and hatred for the whites that controlled the plantations, and it was vulgarized and ribald. Let us move away from this, lest we become those that no longer admire beauty or the stars. I will speak unto them of the most contemptible thing. That, however, is the last man. And thus spake Zarathustra unto the people. It is time for man to fix his goal. It is time for man to plant the germ of his highest hope. Still is his soil rich enough for it, but that soil will one day be poor and exhausted, and no lofty tree will any longer be able to grow thereon. Alas, there cometh the time when man will no longer launch the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have unlearned to whiz. I tell you, one must still have chaos in one to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, ye have still chaos in you. Alas, there cometh the time when man will no longer give birth to any star. Alas, there cometh the time of the most despicable man, who can no longer despise himself. Lo, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asketh the last man, and blinketh. The earth hath then become small, and on it there hoppeth the last man, who maketh everything small. His species is ineradicable, like that of the ground flea. The last man liveth longest. We have discovered happiness, say the last men, and blink thereby.